I sat in our living room, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, had just told me over the phone that I wouldn't be joining the family trip. "You'll be staying home because it's not enjoyable when outsiders are around," she said with a tone that stung. As she mentioned something about bringing back souvenirs, her voice dripped with sarcasm. The call ended abruptly, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I looked around, feeling out of place in the house that was supposed to be a temporary refuge. When David and I married, I never imagined that living with his parents would be so challenging. But after our apartment got damaged, his mother, Eleanor, insisted we stay with them. At first, it seemed like a good idea, but I quickly learned that her kindness was a mask for her controlling nature. Every day with Eleanor was a test of patience. She had a way of making me feel small, questioning my every move, from how I cooked to how I cleaned. It was exhausting, trying to live up to her standards, knowing I would never meet them. And David, he just stayed quiet, caught between us. I remember how different things were when David and I first met. We worked together and slowly became friends, and then more. He was different then, more assertive, more present. But living with his parents changed him, or maybe it just showed a side of him I hadn't seen before. I always knew that Eleanor preferred her son over anyone else, but I never thought it would affect me this way. I tried to fit in, to be the daughter-in-law she wanted, but nothing seemed to work. The more I tried, the more she pushed me away. Now, sitting here, feeling like an outsider in what was supposed to be my home, I realized that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, always feeling unwanted and unappreciated. As I put away the suitcase I had started to pack for the trip, a sense of determination filled me. Eleanor may have won this round, but I wasn't going to let her dictate my happiness. I had to find a way to stand up for myself, to show that I wasn't just an extension of her family, but a person with my own worth. As I put away my suitcase, I couldn't help but think back to how different life was when David and I first met. We worked at the same company, in different departments, but our paths crossed often. It started with casual conversations by the coffee machine, which turned into lunches, and eventually, dates. David was charming, kind, and he made me laugh. It was easy to fall in love with him. We got married 3 years ago, and at first, our life together was everything I had hoped for. We had our own apartment, and we were building our life together. But then, an unexpected fire in the neighboring unit turned our lives upside down. Our apartment was damaged, and we were suddenly homeless. That's when Eleanor stepped in. "Why don't you two stay at our place?" she had offered. It seemed like a good solution at the time. David was relieved, and honestly, so was I. But I didn't realize the price I'd have to pay for that help. Living with David's parents was challenging from the start. Eleanor had always been polite, but once we moved in, her true colors showed. She criticized how I did the laundry, how I cooked, even how I decorated our room. It felt like she was constantly watching and judging me. David, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to it all. He was happy to be back in his childhood home, and I think part of him enjoyed being taken care of by his mother again. I tried to talk to him about how I felt, but he just didn't see it. "She's just set in her ways," he'd say, or, "You know how moms are." But Eleanor wasn't just any mom. She was a mom who made it clear I wasn't good enough for her son. Despite the tension, I tried to make the best of the situation. I thought that if I could just prove to Eleanor that I was a good wife, a good person, she would accept me. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Her house, her rules. Looking back, I wonder if I was naive to think I could win her over. Maybe I should have pushed David harder to move out, to find our own place again. But I didn't, and here I was, stuck in a house where I wasn't wanted, preparing to be left behind while they all went on a family trip without me. As I closed the closet door on the suitcase, I realized that this was more than just about a missed trip. It was about finding my place in this family, or maybe realizing that I never would. I needed to figure out what my next move was, for my own sake. Sitting alone in the house, I began to reflect on the escalating tensions with Eleanor. It wasn't just the snide comments or the constant criticism. It was the way she made me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. My efforts to be a good wife and daughter-in-law seemed to vanish into thin air. never enough to please her. I thought back to the countless evenings spent in silence after another of Eleanor's remarks. Sometimes it was about how I arranged the living room or the way I spoke. Other times it was more personal, like questioning my career choices or why David and I hadn't started a family yet. Each comment was a subtle jab, reminding me that I wasn't living up to her standards. David's reaction, or lack thereof, hurt the most. He always seemed to find a middle ground, trying not to upset either of us. But in doing so, he often sided with his mother. I understood his difficult position, but I couldn't help feeling abandoned. "She's just worried about us," he would say, trying to justify her behavior. But it felt like a betrayal every time he failed to stand up for me. I kept myself busy with work and household chores, partly to avoid confrontation and partly to prove my worth. I worked part-time at a local supermarket, a job that Eleanor deemed unambitious. But I liked it. It gave me a sense of independence and a break from the tense atmosphere at home. Yet, no matter how hard I worked or how much I tried to keep the peace, it was never enough for Eleanor. Her house was her kingdom, and I was merely an unwelcome guest. It was a constant struggle, trying to maintain my identity while being overshadowed by her presence. I remember one particularly harsh weekend. I had just finished cleaning the entire house, a task that Eleanor usually criticized. Expecting another round of complaints, I was surprised when she walked in and said nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had done something right. But then, as I sat down with a cup of coffee, she appeared out of nowhere. "Jessica, your cleaning is too sloppy. You need to spend more time on it and put some gratitude into it for your hardworking husband. As his wife, it's your duty to support him." Her words stung, and I felt my efforts crumble under her scrutiny. I tried to argue, to defend myself, but it was useless. Eleanor had made up her mind about me, and nothing I said or did would change that. It was a lonely feeling, being in a house full of people yet feeling utterly alone. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I realized how much this situation was affecting me. My confidence had taken a hit, and I was constantly second-guessing myself. I knew something had to change, but I wasn't sure what or how. I just knew I couldn't keep living under Eleanor's shadow, constantly trying to prove myself to someone who had already decided I wasn't enough. I had to admit, the idea of a spa getaway with David had initially filled me with a sense of excitement, a chance for us to rekindle our relationship away from the pressures of his family home. We discussed destinations with soft giggles and whispered dreams, circling dates on the calendar that promised a respite from the cold reality of our daily lives. But my optimism had been a delicate bubble, one that Eleanor effortlessly popped with her intrusive demands. She transformed our intimate plans into a family excursion to celebrate her anniversary with George, David's father. My heart sank when David, caught in his mother's excitement, echoed her sentiments, claiming that a family trip would be just as enjoyable. The promise he'd whispered to me, that next time it would be just the two of us, felt fragile in his earnest reassurances. I agreed, though reluctance weighed on every word, and I threw myself into the trip's preparation, hoping that my efforts would at least be seen and appreciated. I delved into the organization with an energy that surprised even me. Perhaps deep down, it was an attempt to regain some control over a situation that had swiftly slipped from my grasps. I chose the sights we would see, the food we would taste, and the bed where we would lay our heads, quietly taking solace in the small victory that Eleanor seemed disinterested in the logistics. The day before our departure was a whirlwind of activity, of lists checked and bags packed. It was with weary satisfaction that I finally allowed my head to hit the pillow, mentally reviewing the itinerary one last time before succumbing to sleep. My alarm's call the next morning was a harsh one, screaming at me to rise and face the day. But when I stirred, the space beside me was empty, and an uneasy feeling curled in my stomach. I called for David, searched the house, and found only silence as my answer. Panic fluttered in my chest as I reached for my phone, trying to quell the fear with every ring. And then Eleanor answered, her voice echoing cheerfully through the line from the road, removing any doubt about what had happened. They'd left, just as simply as that, with no regard for me or the plans we'd made. My protests were met with mockery and a swift click of finality as the line went dead. So there I was, alone with my luggage and a void where my family was supposed to be. I could have crumbled, I suppose. I could have let the sadness drown me. But instead, I laughed, a sound of disbelief and resolve intermingled. I'll show them, I thought, anger and determination giving rise to a sudden plan. I opened my laptop and with a few clicks, booked myself a trip that mirrored the one I was supposed to be on, a room just for me in a luxury hotel I had wanted to visit, a table for one in a restaurant with glowing reviews. I packed my bag with an enthusiasm that felt both liberating and bittersweet. Stepping out of the house, I felt the sun on my face, a gentle encouragement for the journey ahead. I boarded the train, alone and unyielding in my decision to enjoy this time for myself. As the landscape whisked by, I could feel the threads of my former life loosening, the hold of Eleanor's world diminishing with every mile. I would find my happiness, with or without their approval. And if by chance I crossed paths with the family I had thought was mine, I would hold my head high. They might have denied me a place in their trip, but they couldn't take away my spirit or my joy. As the train neared the final station, I wrapped the shawl tighter around my shoulders, partly against the chill of early morning, and partly in anticipation. The solo trip had not been part of my plan, but it now felt like an act of quiet defiance, a reclaiming of my own narrative. I arrived at the quaint tourist town that was meant to be the backdrop of a romantic trip with David. The glaring absence of his company gave way to a newfound sense of independence. I let my whims direct me, browsing through shops lined with handmade crafts, enjoying the rich aroma of local coffee blends, and laughing with street performers that animated the cobblestone walkways. Every sight was seen through a lens of self-discovery, and every experience felt deeply personal. The weight of the agony caused by Eleanor and David's abandonment began to lift, replaced by a lighter, freer sensation that bubbled within me. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. The day waned, and the evening hues painted the sky, signaling it was time to check into the luxurious hotel I had impulsively booked. I had chosen the best, as a treat to myself for enduring the silent battles at home. As I approached the grand facade, a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. There, among the plush velvet and glinting chandeliers, were Eleanor, David, and George, clearly in distress. I tucked myself behind a decorative pillar, curiosity piqued. Eleanor's voice carried across the lobby, tinged with irritation, wondering aloud why they could not secure a room. Clearly, they hadn't managed to find an accommodation after leaving me behind. David spotted me before I could decide what to do. He called out, a mix of astonishment and guilt flashing across his face as he approached. "Jessica, we couldn't check into the room you booked," he stammered, and Eleanor followed, her face tight with barely contained rage. "Of course you couldn't," I replied with a cool tone I barely recognized as my own. The reservation was in my name, and I hadn't checked in. Without my presence, the keys would remain unclaimed, a simple policy, but effective. Their predicament could have been a satisfying sight, but the joy of their discomfort was overshadowed by a sense of sorrow. This trip was a culmination of the disrespect and disregard they'd shown me since moving into their home. Their petty victory in leaving me behind now seemed like a hollow gain. Eleanor's temper flared as David tried futilely to negotiate with the hotel staff. Ultimately, the sight of them being ushered out by security was more pitiful than amusing. Eleanor vowed to find somewhere better, but her words sounded hollow and desperate. I turned from the scene that was once my family drama and approached the check-in counter, ready for a night of solitude in the peace of an elegant room. With my belongings in tow and my head held high, I stepped across the threshold into the next chapter of my life, one filled with possibilities and untouched by Eleanor's shadow. Turning back was not an option, not now, not after all that had transpired. Checking into the hotel felt like stepping into another world, a sanctuary of luxury and tranquility that seemed almost surreal against the rough fabric of recent events. The room I was escorted to boasted grand windows, an opulent bed, and a balcony that offered a breathtaking view of the setting sun. Alone, I unpacked my suitcase, each article of clothing a reminder of the journey I had embarked upon, both physically and emotionally. I decided to explore the hotel, and as I walked through the elegant corridors, I could feel layers of stress peel off with every step. By the time I returned to the grand lobby, I was transformed, no longer the cast-aside wife, but a woman on an adventure of her own making. As I lounged on a plush sofa, savoring my newfound peace, I overheard a hushed conversation that snatched at my attention. A pair of women discussing a harrowing tale about a nearby hotel with a tarnished reputation. They spoke of thefts, strange noises, and an unsolved mystery of a past guest's untimely death. The details sent a chill across my skin, and I couldn't help but wonder if Eleanor, David, and George had stumbled into that very place in their desperate search for a room. Shaking off the unsettling tale, I made my way to dinner, alone yet content. The meal was sumptuous, each bite an indulgence that soothed more than just hunger. I was celebrating not the dissolution of my family ties, but my resilience, my strength to rise from the emotional quagmire that had threatened to ensnare me. Returning to my room, the night embraced me like an old friend, cocooning me in its velvet quiet. As I prepared for bed, my phone lit up, a call from Eleanor. They had found a room, she crowed, reveling in their small triumph. I bit back a warning about the notorious hotel, my instincts urging caution. But her laughter at my concern quickly trampled any goodwill. "Enjoy being regretful," she jeered before the line went dead. I could have persisted, could have tried to save them from potential peril, but my patience was exhausted. Eleanor had made her bed, and now she'd have to lie in it, be it in a haunted hotel or a bed of roses. I turned off my phone, severing the final tether to the chaos of my old life. That night, as I slept in a bed far too large for one person, I dreamed of freedom, a vast open space waiting for me to fill it with new memories, new laughter, free from the binds of family strife. And as the dawn began to breach the night's darkness, I knew that one chapter of my life had ended, and another was ready to begin. Morning light filtered gently through diaphanous curtains. It coaxed me awake with a gentle warmth, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in my heart the night before. As I sat up, the previous evening's encounter with David and his family, and the later ominous phone call, replayed in my mind. After a leisurely breakfast, I ventured out again to savor this precious gift of solitude and exploration. I strolled through a nearby park, admired the art in a local gallery, and indulged in some light shopping, allowing the simple pleasure of making decisions solely for myself. As the afternoon sun began to wane, I returned to the warmth of my temporary haven. My mind dwelled on Eleanor's last call, the triumph in her voice as she described the hidden gem of a hotel they had stumbled upon, and my suppressed fears about its rumored dark history. I pushed aside the unsettling thoughts and decided to focus on my present, a reality filled with tranquility and escape from familial conflict. That evening, I dined at the hotel restaurant, where the soft tinkling of piano keys filled the air with melodies of serenity. It was there, amidst the quiet chatter of other diners, that my resolve solidified. I would not allow my newfound peace to be disrupted. Retiring to my room, I mused over the journey of self-discovery that had begun quite unexpectedly. It dawned on me how much I had sublimated my own needs, desires, and identity for the sake of fitting into David's family. They had left me behind, but in doing so, they had unwittingly set me free. And then, my peaceful contemplation was rudely interrupted by the chime of my smartphone. It was Eleanor again, her voice unnaturally bright as she told me about their comfortable hotel stay. Despite the shiver that ran down my spine, I kept my tone light as I recommended caution due to the eerie rumors. Her response was laughter, derisive, confident, and steeped in denial. One last time, the dawn of concern tried to rise within me to warn them of potential dangers. But Eleanor's flippant goodbye silenced my compassion. I was done being the woman who worried about those who had left her in the dust with little more than thinly veiled contempt. The sound of my smartphone powering down reverberated through the silence, like a door closing on that chapter of my life. No longer would I be the doormat for Eleanor's self-righteousness or the tension in David's divided heart. It was time to move forward, to find my place in the world where I could bloom unimpeded by the chill of familial disregard. Sleep found me easily that night, and it was deep, peaceful, void of the nightmarish scenarios that had threatened to haunt me. When I awoke, it was with a clarity and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was time to leave, not just the hotel, but everything that represented my old life. As I checked out and stepped onto the train home, I knew without a doubt that I was journeying not just toward a place, but toward a future, crafted by my own design. The train ride back to what had been my home brought a cascade of mixed emotions. Despite the serenity I had discovered within myself during the trip, a sense of foreboding loomed over me as the familiar landscape came into view. I was returning to a place where my presence had become a point of contention, and now I was ready to face whatever awaited me. Upon arriving, the aura of the family home felt different, almost charged with an anxious energy. The light that spilled from the windows seemed harsh, a beacon that screamed of tumult rather than the warmth of a welcome. With every step I took towards the door, determination steeled my resolve. "I'm home," I announced, as casually as I could manage, pushing the door open. The reaction was immediate. My presence stirred the occupants into a frenzy of exclamations and finger-pointing. As the noise died down, Eleanor relayed the story of their nightmarish stay in a fearful, breathless torrent. They had spent the night in the very hotel that had been the subject of terrifying rumors, the same one I had warned Eleanor about. When she recounted how their belongings had been stolen, with the hotel staff dismissive and unhelpful, I couldn't help but wonder if their experiences were a direct result of their earlier vanities. David and Eleanor rounded on me, blaming their misfortune on my earlier inaction, their words sharp and accusatory. "If only you had told us more seriously to run," Eleanor seethed, while David's gaze carried the weight of disappointment. The blame was unjust and ironic. If I had been part of the trip as originally planned, we would have all avoided the appalling situation that befell them. When I pointed this out, David's temper flared, and with it came the words that finally broke us apart. "We're getting a divorce," he declared, his face red with anger and frustration. Shock took hold for a moment before I regained my composure. I moved to our bedroom and retrieved the divorce papers that had been, until now, a hidden safeguard, a silent acknowledgement of the potential implosion of our marriage. Laying them out like a final gambit, I watched as David's anger gave way to disbelief. "We'll handle this like adults," I stated, the calm in my voice belying the earthquake that had just shaken my world. David's feet were rooted to the spot, unsure, while Eleanor capered around him, emboldened as ever, pushing her dispirited son to cut ties with me. And so, the life I had known with David and his parents crumbled to dust. Before long, the divorce was final, and the page had turned on a painful chapter that had defined my existence for far too long. In the wake of our separation, Eleanor's glee was short-lived. Word of the events traveled through whispers and gazes within the community, tarnishing her image. No longer was she the matriarch of a revered household. She became a harbinger of discord. I packed my things and left without looking back, my heart an odd mixture of ache and anticipation. I accepted the finality of my departure as the house I had tried in vain to make a home faded into the background of my train window view. For the first time in a long while, I was master of my destiny. With the help of friends, I began rebuilding my life in my hometown, starting anew, free from the clutches of an oppressive family dynamic. I embraced my singlehood, reveling in the quiet freedom it brought, freedom to breathe, to exist, to be me without restriction or disapproval. Back in the town where I grew up, I took up a new job, reconnecting with parts of myself that had been long buried beneath the role I had played as David's wife. I was rediscovering who I was, reclaiming the pieces of my identity that had been chipped away by years of servitude to someone else's happiness. For now, marriage was a closed book, set upon a high shelf to be perhaps revisited in the far future. But in the present moment I was content. Content to let the tapestry of my life weave new patterns, ones that held the promise of hope, self-respect, and endless possibilities. The cool air of my hometown was a balm to my soul as I stepped off the train. After the tumult of the past few days, the familiar sights and sounds wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. I had come full circle, returning to the place I had once been eager to leave, seeking new adventures. Now it offered the promise of a fresh start. I moved into a small apartment downtown, A humble space, but it was mine, and the privacy felt like luxury after years under Eleanor's scrutinizing gaze. My new job, secured through a friend's referral, was a role at a local nonprofit, a stark contrast to the part-time supermarket position that Eleanor had looked down upon. In the evenings after work, I would walk along the riverbank, the flowing water mirroring the thoughts racing through my mind. I reflected on my marriage with David and my interactions with his family. There was a time when I doubted my actions, when Eleanor's comments made me second-guess myself. But here, in the solitude of nature, I found a sense of inner peace. I wasn't the woman Eleanor had painted me to be. I was resilient, capable, and now truly free. I reconnected with old friends, and the sense of belonging they provided was restorative. We shared meals, stories, and laughter, a stark contrast to the forced dinners at Eleanor's table. With each passing day, the hurt diminished, and in its place grew a newfound sense of self-confidence. As weeks turned into months, the pieces of my new life fell into place. The job was fulfilling, offering a sense of purpose that extended beyond the paycheck. The work I did mattered, and I felt valued, a stark contrast to the feelings of inadequacy I had endured for so long. Word reached me at times about how things were faring in my old life. David, who had been so determined in his decision to divorce, seemed lost without the woman he had once deemed unworthy. Eleanor's reputation had suffered greatly, and her social circle had dwindled. The schadenfreude I expected it to feel never materialized. Instead, I felt a profound sense of relief that I was no longer entwined in their narrative. My evenings were spent on hobbies that had been neglected, reading books, painting, and attending local theater productions. I dove into these activities with gusto, savoring the joy they brought with a childlike delight I hadn't felt in years. Eventually, the inquiries came. Well-meaning friends and family nudged me towards the dating scene, but I was content to remain single. The scars of my marriage and subsequent divorce had healed, but they had taught me invaluable lessons about love, respect, and most importantly, the strength of my own spirit. So, as I closed the door on the past and looked to the future, I did so with a heart full of hope. The road ahead was unpaved and uncertain, but it was mine to traverse, laden with opportunities yet to be discovered, dreams yet to be fulfilled, and a chance at happiness that was entirely my own. I allowed myself one last look back, not in regret but in acknowledgement of all I had overcome. Then I turned away, striding confidently towards whatever tomorrow would bring, knowing that whatever it was, with my resilient heart and my unyielding will, was ready to meet it head-on.